Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you had a good lunch. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the second half of our class. And I believe that Brenda Bridges is going to start us off with a section on staffing the shelter.
There we go. Brett, Sophie, come on.
Brenda, are you ready to go?
I am. So hi, everybody. I'm Brenda Bridges. I'm the mass care lead for the San Bernardino chapter. And I'm just going to give a brief overview on how we staff the shelter and what those activities are in doing
ready
so.
to go?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can anyone hear?
Yes,
Sherry, can you hear me?
we can hear her.
Okay. If we can advance the next slide.
Is she muted or unmuted? I'll tell you in a second.
I don't think the live group can hear me. Sherry, can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Thanks, Brenda.
No worries. Can we advance to the next slide, please? Okay, so at the arrival of the shelter, there should be a staff sign-in sheet and sign-out sheet. So when our volunteers start to arrive for their shifts at the shelter, they will need to sign in. And it's usually their name, the time that they sign in, and their volunteer connection member ID. Once they have signed in, they will receive contact information from the sheltering supervisors that are going to be working with them, from the shelter manager, and any other contacts, our SRT team, our IDC people that are there. So we want to make sure that the volunteers know how to reach the other activities within the shelter. And then they will also be introduced to the volunteers that are going to be working with them. So if the volunteers are new to the shelter, or even if we need a refresher, we usually do a job induction where we kind of give an overview of what the positions are that they will be handling, whether it's in the dormitory, they're doing registration, if they are doing feeding, manning the information table. So they would receive a brief training on what is needed in order to work those particular areas. Once that's done, each of the volunteers will receive their assignment. If they are to report to the dormitory area, they will be advised on what their assignment is. If they are a service associate, they would have a particular assignment that would be given to them, as well as if you are a supervisor, your assignment will be given to you as well. We want to get them familiar with the shelter, where everything is, where all of the different other activities are in the shelter, so that they can be sure that they can easily access the shelter, that they can ask questions from the clients or any of the outside visitors that we may have with regards to what areas are off limits to them. They want to be able to know and direct clients to where the restrooms are and that kind of thing. And that goes along with the tour of the shelter as well, to know where the showers are, where the feeding is going to be set up. So they would also be given a tour of that shelter, so they would be familiar with everything that's within the shelter. The sign out at the end of the shift, they will be instructed that this is what they need to do so that we can keep track of our volunteers if they are on shift or off shift. Next slide, please. Okay, so the shelter logs, these are logs that are used by our volunteers as well as the manager. So the general log is used by all of the staff, and they need to kind of take a look at this. This is going to be part of the induction when volunteers come on. They want to make sure that they look at the general log to see, what was probably going on at the night shift that they need to be aware of. All of the staff can submit entries. They need to date and sign their initials next to the entries that they put in. And it could be things, visitors that have come in. It could be anything that that they notice in the shelter that they need to make a note of, whether it be clients, if there's a special dietary need, or any information like that, that they can enter into the log. So the shelter log for the general log is just an observation of anything that goes on in the shelter that may be of concern that needs to be escalated up, or just simply, we had someone to come in and, a visitor to, just to say, how everything is set up. So we want to make sure that we keep these logs to document anything that goes on that is necessary or pertaining to the shelter. This notebook or the shelter log needs to be kept away from the clients, or it should not be visible to anybody just walking in. We want to keep that in a place that's accessible only to the staff, where their eyes only. The manager's log is a more sensitive log. Any issues that may come up with clients or even the volunteers themselves is going to be kept by the manager's log. Any law enforcement issues or anything like that that pertains to the activities on a shift during in the shelter. And this too needs to be kept in a secure area. Next slide, please. So the shelter shift inspection form, this is to be done at the beginning of each shift. So normally our shifts are 12 hours from 7 to 7. And at the beginning of each shift, you want to assign this to one of the volunteers to complete this. We just want to make sure that there's no damage to the shelter. We want to make a notation that exits and entrances are clear from any kind of obstruction. We want to make sure that the signage is up and properly displayed. So this needs to be a walkthrough that's done at the beginning of each of the shifts. Next slide, please. Okay, my computer might be a little slow. There we go. Okay, so this is a shelter staffing tool that's primarily used by the shelter manager, but our shelter supervisors are involved in this as well, since you are the ones that are on the floor and what your staff needs are. So this is a tool that we use to kind of give us an outline or an overview of what kind of staff we need in the shelter based on the number of clients. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so our staffing matrix, once we have determined the number of staff that we need for the shelter, We will go ahead and fill this out for our workforce engagement team to know what our needs are, what we have, and what we don't have in a particular area within the shelter. This is a great reference so that you can see a number of days out and you can plan accordingly what your staffing needs are going to be. This is great when we have our local events because it gives us the information for our staff in advance that we can plan for. For instance, with the feeding team, not everyone is there for the duration. So this gives us a good idea as to what staff we're going to need in the days to come, as well as a glance at who will be taking days off and that kind of thing. So we can, plan ahead to be fully staffed for our shelter. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is what our staff request form looks like. And it is filled out based on the need of what we are requesting for our shelter. The request can be a by name request. It can be for a specialty track volunteer. And it could, in additionally, help us to plan for future staffing needs. This form, our supervisors do assist with this, but this form is filled out primarily by the shelter manager and then is sent up to our disaster workforce engagement team to, put it out on the door if necessary, or to be able to look at the local volunteers. This form can also be used for our event-based volunteers as well. Next slide, please. So this is just a staffing visual. Not all of the shelters use this, but this is just usually in the shelter manager's office, where they just kind of keep track of who's on the day shift, who's coming in on the night shift, what your days are, and that kind of thing. It shows on a sticky note that can be easily removed and replaced with whatever staff that's going to be coming in. It lists the name, the phone number of the volunteer, the day off, and then their last day. So this is a tool that can also assist when we are planning for our staffing needs. Next slide, please. Okay, so our event-based volunteers, these are our EBVs. And these EBVs are treated and processed and supported in the same way as our other responders on an operation. Until the background checks are completed, however, they don't work alone with the clients. We cannot have them interacting with the clients until those background checks have cleared. And this includes children or have access to Red Cross funds or personal client information. So we engage our EBVs and it helps the community because there are several times when we have a lot of people coming into the shelter wanting to help. And these are community, neighbors and community organizations that want to be able to assist with our sheltering operation. So we go ahead and we process our event-based volunteers, like I said, indicating or using the background checks. Until they are cleared, we normally place our EBVs in areas like manning the information desk. If we have unsolicited donations management, we would have them work that to kind of sort through those donations. So we would have them working in areas where they do not have the direct, that they are not working directly with clients in the shelters. Next slide, please. And Jane, I think Jane is going to go over our DR work performance evaluations for us.
Connected to its phone. Connected to iPhone.
Hey, Brenda, thank you so much for getting us all up to date on staffing. So I find the most important part of your deployment is your evaluation. So when you are assigned to a DR, there is a new line on your homepage in Volunteer Connection now. They've done it so nicely. And it'll read what your DRO assignment is and your DRO roster. So it lets you see exactly who your direct reports are. If someone doesn't appear on your direct report or on your roster and it is your direct report, this is a staff services contact and you would contact them. So you would click on your DRO team roster on Volunteer Connection on your homepage and then click on reports. And then you can see everyone who reports to you and find out, who exactly it is. And then part of the process of working on DRs is the evaluation. And part of it also is you can now, since it's online, you can start the evaluation and then you can save a draft. So you can click the satisfaction or save a draft. And this allows you to return to the evaluation time and time again to keep updating it as things go along. And then you just hit save draft. So the optimal timing is that evaluations are completed prior to the end of the volunteer's disaster assignment. So the idea is that before you leave, somebody has completed your evaluation. So I try to meet with the direct reports to conduct the performance evaluation in person. But now with virtual, you can do it on the phone or on Teams. And this is a vital meeting and everyone deserves this meeting. So of course, distance and the virtual life has made this hard. But again, the phone call can work. And the most important part of the evaluation is the narrative. So there's a narrative on there, and it should specifically cover what your job has been, how you executed that job, and it's based on 5 competencies. So we look at these evaluations and the beginning sentence, and this is, there is at the end of this presentation, there is going to be a links page to where you can get links, and there is a PowerPoint presentation on filling out the current evaluation. So I'm just going to walk through the part of it about the notes. So I like to begin my evaluations on a volunteer by saying, Joe was assigned to the Big Shoe Fire in Riverside as a shelter supervisor. The evacuation area encompassed 20 miles. 143 clients were in the shelter. They served 562 meals. 15 shelter associates worked under Joe, and he managed the team in a professional manner. This was a new environment for Joe as it was his first assignment as supervisor under COVID protocols. Joe did an exceptional job of getting up to speed quickly and is a very good leader with flexibility and innovative solutions in this stressful environment. So you want to create the story. You want to make sure when you go back and look at these evaluations, you understand where you were and what the situations that were overcome. So any great accomplishments or exceptional performances should be noted. In my opinion, it's Jane Scanlon's opinion, if you marked exceptional for every criteria, you should have a story to back that up. If not, then just check effective. Everyone is not exceptional. So
except David O'Neill. So I just want to share with you on the notes on my last deployment. It just said Jane was a true soldier. She carried out her supervisory role effectively, but I mostly appreciated her flexibility and sense of duty in a very volatile context. Jane is reliable and compassionate. Wow. And yet my supervisor checked that I was exceptional on every single part on the top part of my evaluation. So I don't feel like if you check exceptional on the top, please have the documentation on the bottom. So that's the nice part of saving it as a draft. So, and my supervisor did not ask for any of my input. And I just think that there should have been details about where I was deployed, because it was during a major fire in California to a congregate shelter. And then they could have thrown in that it was in a pandemic. So don't just click on exceptional all the way down as if it's just a given if you do the job. So ask the volunteer to give input if you do not work closely with them. Or even if you do work closely with them, ask, talk to them about it. So when you are checking the box front, did this volunteer perform as needed or go above and beyond? Include details in the narrative to offer insight when this volunteer is asking for a promotion. This is 2 weeks of long days and nights away from home. So make an effort to write an appropriate evaluation. And then if you are a supervisor and you're leaving the job, leave notes behind for the next supervisor about the volunteers who are still on the job and worked for you. So, and then once you examine the posted evaluation, hopefully it matches what you and the supervisor discussed. You can then add notes in the bottom of the evaluation and then click acknowledge. But just so you know, there's no notice when this survey is available for your notes for when it shows up in your Volunteer Connection account. So stay alert and watch for the satisfactory, and then you can click on that to open your evaluation. The other part of being a supervisor is that if you ever need to click on needs improvement, please consult with your supervisor first. This is not as easy as you think. Please don't just click on that. Contact your lead. And then when a volunteer has worked between 3 to 5 days, they can request an evaluation. After 7 days, an evaluation is required. And part of this is, I just want to stress, everyone that leaves a job should already have an evaluation completed on them, and it should be for the job that they did complete. The end.
Jane, I think you have some questions.
How many days do they have to write the eval if they don't give it to you before you leave?
Who writes the eval?
He says, how many days does a supervisor have to write the eval if your people have left?
Sherry Curtis, would you like to answer that question?
So if you are the supervisor, your evals will stay in your queue for 7 days after you leave. However, it's best if you don't wait that long, as Jane said. Any more questions, David?
I have a question.
Okay, there's another question. Hold on.
Print an eval, because sometimes in the beginning, it did not show up in the volunteers.
Okay, so Erin Fox is asking if you can print the evals.
Would this be before you completed or after you completed in your home?
After I completed, because I have completed some, but they didn't show up in the volunteers.
Account. It could take a few days for it to appear in the Volunteer Connection, for it to be shown in the volunteers Volunteer Connection account, because after you complete it, it then has to go above you and be approved, and then it gets submitted.
So Erin, what I would recommend, I'm not sure the answer to that question. I don't know if there's a print option, but I would definitely take a screenshot of your evals before you hit submit, just in case, you know, technology can be kind of glitchy sometimes. Just in case it goes astray somewhere, then you'll know what you had said in case you have to recreate it. You can expand the summary by hitting on those little, the little dots in the bottom right corner. Yeah. Okay, any more?
Sherry, FYI, if you do not save the eval as you're going through and you leave page, you'll lose everything that you put down. So please save before you exit.
Right. So David, I hope you guys heard that, but David is making the point that it's important that you hit save draft. If you're putting in notes the way Jane was suggesting, be sure you hit save draft at the bottom before you exit, or everything that you put in there will go away.
And that completes the evaluations. We will now move on with Sherry Curtis with media.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question. How many of you, by raise of hands, are intimidated about thinking about the media showing up in the shelter and wanting to interview you? Come on,
So
be
there
honest.
were a couple people raising their
I
hands.
see some hands going up online too, at least 4, 5, 6. Okay, and that is very normal. So here's what I'm going to say about the media. They're not out to get you. That is not why they've come to our shelter. They've come to our shelter because they're trying to do a job and tell the story, right? Normally, you're going to find the media at the beginning of an event, and the bigger the event and the more splashy it is, the more likely it is that the media is going to show up at your shelter, okay? So you manage the situation, right? Don't let them be pushy, and usually they're not. Okay, they just want to get a story, whether it's from you or from your clients. Have a conversation with them. They're human beings, right? And we want them to tell our story, right? This is how we get the word out. They're hopefully most of the time on our side. They will be able to communicate our mission. They'll be able to talk about our unsolicited donations policies. They'll be able to let the public know where to come and when to come. So, and what we're able to offer, right? So that's all important stuff, and we want it to be told. So let's talk about some of the things that you can do. Okay, I'm not even looking at my slide. I probably should. So they are allowed. Okay, this has changed over the years, but the media is allowed in the shelters. Now, are they allowed in the dormitory?
There's a lot of head shaking no, just so you know.
Some yeses.
Oh,
I see some no's.
Allow, but they can't take pictures.
Okay, so somebody said they're allowed, but they can't take pictures. If they're desperate to get a picture of the dormitory, there are ways to manage that, right? You can go into the shelter in advance of the media team. Whoever happens to be in the shelter at the time, let them know, your clients know that media is coming in. You can section off a little piece of the dormitory that you can allow them to take pictures of. And the clients who don't want to be in that picture, in that section of the dormitory, can step away for a little while that is happening. Okay, so there are ways to work it, but really they just want to tell the story. That's their job. They're reporters. Okay, don't be intimidated by them. On the larger responses, you are going to find that the public information officer from the Red Cross will be assigned. They may have someone at your shelter to deal with the media, right? Or they may just be available via telephone. If your reporters have a deadline that's coming up very quickly, then you want to accommodate them as much as you can at the shelter without impacting your client's confidentiality. If they have a longer deadline, if their report isn't due in until tomorrow, you want to get them in touch with our public information officer at Red Cross. They're called the PIO, right? Because we like our acronyms at Red Cross, right? Can I get the next slide? I'm not following these at all. Yeah, did that. Okay. One of the things that I strongly recommend, if you still feel uncomfortable about how to deal with the media, Red Cross has this incredible class that I recommend that you all take, and it's called Public Affairs Essentials. If you can sign up for it on Edge, Public Affairs Essentials. Please, it'll make you so much more comfortable about what you can and can't say. But the most important thing is you only speak to what you know, right? Don't make up something. Don't speak for the fire department. Don't speak for the police. Speak to what Red Cross is doing. If they say, hey, is the fire going to get put out? Your response is, well, that would be the purview of the fire department. But what I can tell you is that the people who are in evacuation orders are here in our shelter, and these are the services we're offering them. Okay, you turn the questions back around to what Red Cross is doing. Okay, we don't know what fire department is doing. Let them speak for themselves. Okay. I think that's it, unless there are questions.
One comment real
Mhm.
quick. It's okay to ask them to tell you the questions beforehand and go over the answers so that you're not surprised when you're put on the air. It just makes it easier.
That's a great idea. I don't know if you could hear that, but Linda suggested that you ask the reporter to give you the questions ahead of time so you can prepare your responses. That's a great idea. Anything else? Okay, terrific. Then
And always look at the camera.
they'll probably direct you. They'll tell you how they want you to stand and where they want you to look and all that, because they want it to look good too, right? It could be their future. It could be their Pulitzer Prize. Who knows? You can help them get it. All right, we're going to move on to our most favorite topic, reporting. So here we go. This is always a bugaboo, right? When you get onto the DR and you have 75 people saying, hey, I need a shelter count. I need a shelter count. How many people are in your parking lot? How come there's so many RVs out there? Where's your daily shelter report? Where's your 204? Where is your midnight count? Where's your, right? It happens all the time, okay? Know in advance what reports you're responsible for and exactly when they're due and to whom. That should be the very first thing you find out if you're taking over from another supervisor or if you're walking in on the first day. Find that out from your manager, find them out from the headquarters sheltering manager, whoever is your direct supervisor, is the person who can give you that information. It will make your life so much easier if you have that in your toolkit right away. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, shall we? So the daily shelter report. This one is obvious what it is, right? The daily shelter report. This is going to provide the headquarters with how many clients you have, what the demographic age range is, how many meals you served, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, how many snacks you served. These are all data points that allow us to tell the Red Cross story. Right? This is what we bring to our donors and potential donors about our service delivery. Incredibly important, okay? But I will say, and I'm a big stickler about this, if you're giving me a daily shelter report, I expect that the use today, be available for use tomorrow, and needed tomorrow. Those need to consistently match what was reported the day before. Okay, so make sure your math works out right. Okay, and if you reported that you had, 25 clients yesterday and today you had 48, I better see that there have been that many dormitory registrations put in. Okay, does that make sense? I know you're all nodding even though I can't see you. Okay, next one. All right. So this is a protocol that was put together year before last, I think it was, because in Southern California, we often find that there are people who bring their RVs, their tents, their tent trailers, and they hang out in the parking lot, right? They don't actually register to stay in our dormitories, and it's a real challenge to count them. But oftentimes they'll come in and use our other services, right? They'll access casework, they'll access health services, they'll get meals inside the shelter. So it's important that we have at least a ballpark number of who's out there. And for safety issues, we're not asking our volunteers to go knocking on, on camper doors and say how many people are in there, right? So here's just a quick way to do a ballpark count. A tent is 1.8 people, and I don't know how we cut them in, in eighths, but we did. And an auto or RV, you count 2.5 per vehicle. And that is they've determined that that's a pretty good way of ballparking. Next. Okay, where's Sharon? She's not here. So feeding and snack counts are very near and dear to Sharon's heart, right? So it's vitally important that the feeding and snack counts get done correctly. You will be doing inventorying of what you have in your shelters in terms of snacks and supplies for feeding, like your clamshells, your cups and plates and all that good stuff. Order ahead, order at least 3 days ahead. Oh, Anna Marie's here. She's nodding. I know she is. Order at least 3 days ahead for what you expect to need, because it takes a while to turn things around. What is the name of the form that you use to order more stuff? I should hear a chorus. 6409s, right. Okay. And also another important thing for reporting is know who has to approve your 6409s. Okay, and it's going to be different on every response. Sometimes it's going to be the mass care lead. Sometimes they want to go through the AD of ops. It just is going to depend. So get that information early so that you can get your 6409s routed appropriately and approved as quickly as possible. David? What is it? We have a question?
Marilyn, go ahead. You have your hand raised. Real quick.
David, we don't have the speaker on. I can't hear it.
They didn't type it.
Okay, if you can
Just
type
has
your
her hand
questions
raised.
in the chat, that would be awesome. We've got the speaker unplugged for the moment. Okay, next. Okay, this is a really good slide. When you guys get this copy of the slides, I would cut it out and paste it on your wall, okay? This is what you are responsible for, okay? Doesn't mean you have to do it yourself, but these are the ones that you personally are responsible for.
In green.
In green. And the ones in the blue side are the ones that this information gets pulled into, just so you understand how the process works, okay? So your daily inventory, this is a good job for your overnight shelter team, right? When things are a little quieter, they can go through and do your inventory of how many snacks do you have, how many clean cots do you have left, and so on, right? Your daily shelter report is usually due in by, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but get that information and make sure. Meal and snack counts, those also are going into your daily shelter report, right? But your feeding manager on the job may ask for counts at different times of the day or inventories at different times of the day. So be sure you understand when those are due. The 6409s we've talked about, anytime you need to order. The midnight count goes into RCView NSS. So that is usually put in by either the shelter manager, the headquarters sheltering manager, or somebody from Frost will call the shelter supervisors of record and ask them for their count, and Frost will be entering that. Okay, so again, another thing that you're going to have to find out what the protocol is for the specific disaster that you're assigned to. Okay. Frost. Support team. I don't remember what that acronym stands for, but if anybody knows, shout it out or put it in the chat. Is Melody on this? Somebody will know what it is. Okay, so those things roll into 215, which has to do with staffing and materials that are needed over the next 24-hour period. The 203, which is also a staffing record, and it will go into the IAP situation report. This is put in by your headquarters sheltering lead. And the 5266 also pulls the numbers from your daily shelter report. So I think that might be my last slide, but very quickly, two of the things that I just mentioned, if you're assigned on a DR, whether it's local or whether it's national, you're going to be getting an email every night from the planning group that includes a link to the IAP, which is the Incident Action Plan, and the SIT rep, the situation report. Those are very, very important documents for you to be aware of, to be familiar with. The IAP will include all of the people who are assigned on the job and where they're going, right? Which locations they're assigned to. It's going to have your contact information for every person in leadership who's assigned on the job. So if you happen to be the shelter supervisor or shelter manager, and you need to get in touch with the public information officer because the media has showed up, where are you going to find their phone number?
IAP.
On the IAP. Yeah, all important documents. And the SIT rep will go through sort of a chronological document of all the things that have transpired during this event. Okay. Unless there are questions, that wraps up reporting.
We're good.
All right, this is Jane. I am going to take on What Am I? So we have so many different labels that we use, and it gets very confusing. So we mix words like supervisor and manager without understanding that there's actually a difference. So volunteers will come to me and they will say, I want to be a manager. So what does that mean when you say that? Do you want to run a mega shelter, or do you want to work in headquarters, or do you just want to have the title of manager? So if you have a shelter supervisor gap, you can work as a shelter manager in a large, complex DR. If you are deployed as a shelter manager, you will most likely be working in headquarters as a shelter lead or district coordinator. Now, let's add to the confusion. There are specialty tracks. So there is the mass care shelter site manager, which is a shelter manager in, again, a complex shelter, which your complex shelters would be mega shelters or in a fairgrounds with a lot of buildings involved.
Or if there was a mass casualty incident.
Or a mass casualty, as Sherry just shared. And this is this qualification, it's for a shelter. They're saying that is for level 4 and above, and it could be for various other reasons. Then another kind of specialty track is the mass care sheltering manager / coordinator. And with this title, you are qualified to be assigned in the position of a DRO headquarters sheltering manager or district sheltering coordinator. Boy, that sounds very confusing. I'm already confused. So it's just that you're just supporting sheltering leadership at the headquarters. So, we talk a lot about what it is that we're doing. So the shelter site supervisor, they've made these very confusing for me. is the volunteer who is making the decisions at the shelter, reporting to the lead, and has overall responsibility for the safe operations in that shelter, both client or staff. The shelter manager can be responsible for multiple shelter sites or one mega shelter with several shelter supervisors reporting to them. So, and this role can be managed by a volunteer with a gap of supervisor, as long as they have experience as a supervisor. So it does get confusing here when we go back and forth between we talk about manager log, and then you call yourself a supervisor. So just keep with me. So having the gap, which is a group activity position of supervisor, you completed the set of courses and competencies which are needed to achieve this position. Just so you know, it's not for everyone. So you can work as a supervisor on a disaster response with a service associate gap and be the supervisor. They call it
Field promotion.
Field promotion. But when you get home, you have to complete the training and have a conversation with your local leadership to actually become a supervisor with the actual gap of shelter supervisor. And then we have the shelter manager. Again, this is when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about the SH/MN, which is a gap, a group activity position, which is similar to a supervisor, but it has an additional set of courses and competencies which you need to complete to achieve this. And then when you have this gap, there is an understanding that you are now working at headquarters in a shelter lead position. So when you say, I want to be a manager, it's a time to have conversations with your lead, whether you want to stay as a supervisor, if you want to stay as a service associate, just make sure you have a conversation, because there are competencies involved. Just because you take all the courses as a shelter supervisor does not mean that you make a good shelter supervisor. And does anyone have any questions about that? Are there any questions?
Erin is falling off her chair now. Are you more confused than you were when Jane started talking? Raise your hand.
I need a diagram.
There are no diagrams coming, and just talk to someone I know it's confusing, but that's the most that I always hear when people come back from a DR. They come and they say, I want to be a manager, and they're not understanding what that really means. You can be a manager on a disaster response as a supervisor. You don't have to go through all the extra steps to become the shelter manager as a gap or the group activity position.
Right. So understanding that if you get a shelter manager gap, an MN gap, you are likely to be deployed to work at headquarters as the sheltering leadership. You are not going to be on the ground in a shelter. So if that is your goal, then absolutely get your MN gap. If you want to work with clients in a shelter environment, that is not what you want.
So as long as I've confused everyone on that, I pushed for this slide because I feel that this is a very confusing part, because on this presentation today, we have service associates because we invited them. We have supervisors and we have managers. So, there's all sorts of levels that you can achieve. It's just how much work you want to put in. So there.
Okay.
Oh, hold on. David has a question.
FYI, you will also need evals to back up. your
David is
position.
saying you need evaluations. to be able to get some of the promotions. So just so you know, that's part of the reason I'm pushing evaluation. So keep it going. Aaron Fox has a question.
DPMs will help you put the package together, but they push it up. The DPMs are not allowed to give you the manager gap.
Oh.
Position has to be done.
And DPMs have no say as who becomes the shelter manager gap. They just put the paperwork together and push it up. They have no say in it. So it's above our pay grade, as I always like to say. All right, moving on.
One is yours.
The next one is me too. So again, I like to insist on this slide because when you are deployed as a supervisor, you could also work as a supervisor in a staff shelter. And there are differences. So normally they do try to put everyone in a hotel or college dorms or a religious retreat. That is the preferred method of housing staff during an operation. But occasionally, if there is limited availability of the commercial lodging, a staff shelter will be open. And it is just like a client shelter, but it's for staff. David O'Neill is grunting, just so you guys know. So the rules and location of this area should be communicated and the appropriate signage should be posted. This is not for clients. This is for staff only. So you're not going to put signage down the street or something. The staff get the address of where they are to sleep at night. So consider the shift schedules when possible. Not everybody works the same 12-hour shifts. Not everybody sleeping in a staff shelter is sheltering. They're from all the other activities. So the dormitory area should be separated to minimize the disturbance from noise for other activities that need to sleep during the daytime hours. They have to have, the staff shelters must have a quiet area for volunteers to sleep during the day without being disturbed. If they are working at night, they have to have this area. Most of the workers are going to be gone during the day. So remind the volunteers to keep their personal space clean and locked. The accommodations need to be made because we're just like everyone else. There are people that snore. They have to have a CPAP. They could arrive in a wheelchair or any other device that could be needed. And there should be an isolation area mapped out just in case volunteers start getting sick. It is so similar to the client shelter, except meals are not typically provided at a staff shelter. You are deployed, you have a card, use your card. If you don't have transportation, ask around other volunteers to see if you can either borrow their car or if they can take you out to get food. The staff shelter site could provide recreational activities. They could designate a social area, but again, this needs to be away from the sleeping area. There could be rules about lights out or quiet, but remember, some of the volunteers are on call all of the time. And I look at that as like LSAP, like if they're always on call and they may get a phone call during the night. But if you get a phone call in the night, please leave the dormitory area when you are talking on the phone. And again, just like clients, the volunteers must sign in and sign out just the same way and fill out a registration form. And the volunteers have to let the supervisor know when they're leaving or fill out the registration form. It's the same thing with the cots. Once the cot is empty, it cannot be reused unless it is cleaned. So, as I always like to say, I know everyone's job is important on a disaster response, but respect everyone's space and their activity. Oh, you know the part I forgot, Sherry? I forgot about the reporting. Oh my gosh, she's gonna kill me.
I was just about
Um,
to jump in.
So, sorry. The reporting is the same at the client shelter. I'm sorry, at the staff shelter as it is the client shelter. It is the same. We have to know the exact same numbers at the exact same time. So you don't just get to slide because it is a staff shelter. And if a request is put out to help at the staff shelter, please offer assistance. We are all in this together, and it really helps when everyone works together. And there are some rules about drinking in the staff shelter. There is no booze allowed in the staff shelter. So please leave the booze.
Not on the permit.
Not on any premise. Do not have booze.
Same rules apply as they do in the shelters
Yes.
for our clients.
So that is how I go. Do we have any questions for the shelters?
Who does the reporting with the staff shelter?
The
Which
report,
shelters?
the shelter supervisor does the reporting. This job is actually a great way for a new supervisor to break into shelter supervising. If you're unsure if this is a task that is something that you're okay with, the staff shelter could be an easy way, or a night shift or something. And that concludes mine, and we will now turn it over to.
Well, I just want to say one thing as regards to staff shelters. We've had things happen in staff shelters. You know, you don't get to abuse the shelter supervisor any more than you would as a client in one of our shelters. You're not special. If you are put in a staff shelter, you do what the shelter supervisor tells you to do and follow the rules and don't misbehave. That's what I'm going to say about that. That was my librarian voice, in case you didn't get to see the face.
And next we have Brenda is going to come back and join us, and Brenda is going to talk to us about the roles of the HQ sheltering manager. Or I'm sorry, shelter support group. So Brenda, you take it over.
Right, hang on until we get her speaker set up though. Hang on 1 second, Brenda.
Battery 70%.
Okay, turn yours.
Okay, Brenda, are you ready?
I am. Looks like is everyone muted? Okay. All right. So I know we talked a lot about the responsibilities and roles of a shelter supervisor in the shelter, but we want you to know that you're not in this alone and you do have support. And one of those is our sheltering support group. Now, the sheltering support group gets activated at a level 5. And what they do is they're designed to help ensure that the shelter managers and the shelter staff have the resources and knowledge to deliver high quality, client-focused, customer service-driven disaster relief. So they're there to help. When they come to your shelter, be open, let them know what's going on, because they are your direct link to headquarters, and they can assist you with anything that is actually going on in the shelter that you may have issues with, or you need material things, computers, or anything like that you don't have currently available to you. Our sheltering support group is there to help you and assist you with this. So the sheltering group support group's job is to advise, make suggestions, provide necessary information about shelter management practices and disaster operation processes, and facilitate communication with the disaster operation leadership. So just what that is they just go through to see how they can make your job easier, how they can assist you in obtaining, the necessary knowledge and information you need in order to help the clients, as well as the staff. It's not just for the clients and making sure that they are being well taken care of, but you yourself as well. So who are they? These are experienced shelter managers, sheltering leads, disaster program managers, and personnel from other response functions who have extensive shelter experience. So you would need to be familiar with the sheltering standards and procedures, the different job tools and doctrines in order to help facilitate and ease anything that's going on with the shelters. So what do? They assist the shelter managers in identifying and resolving issues before they become potential problems by offering real and practical suggestions and solutions. So we're here to help. If you're having staffing issues, whether you are understaffed or there's a volunteer that just really isn't getting what their assignment is or what their role is, the sheltering support team can help with that. They can help you find ways on how to mentor brand new supervisors or volunteers that this is their first deployment. They also provide documents, signage, and other required forms that may be missing. So we don't want you to panic. If you don't have enough registration forms, the sheltering support group can make sure that they provide that for you so that you have the tools you need to operate your shelter effectively. So we don't want you to sweat over the small stuff. This is what they can assist you with. The sheltering support group liaises between the shelter managers and the sheltering leads and the mass care leads at the headquarters. Our sheltering support group reports directly to the AD of operations. So they're there to just kind of help you do what you need to do. If you haven't had a break, they can sit for you, or they can man and take over your responsibilities while you go off and have your lunch break, so that we can make sure that you're being taken care of. So we also promise to be approachable, friendly, and supportive. We're accessible, or the sheltering support group is accessible by phone or in-person visits to answer any questions. They can be understanding, they listen, they ask questions, and they offer helpful suggestions. They're not there to criticize, but to provide constructive feedback that makes our Red Cross shelters more successful. And we also, they also remind just the staff, just thank them for their work and how valuable they are in the work that they do. So this is what our sheltering support group does. They are not the enemy. They are there to help you, to assist you, to try to help meet your needs so that you can focus more on the clients. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay. In addition,
Can we get a couple of questions answered real quick?
Sure.
Is this group part of our staffing requirements? How many do we need per event?
Okay, so the sheltering support group is a specialty track. And they are not a part of the sheltering team when you are requesting staff for the shelter. This is a support group that comes out, and their slogan is every shelter, every day, every need. So if we have a large operation, the sheltering support group goes through all of the shelters every day to support our sheltering team that is there on site. Usually we have 4 teams that are divided into 2 team members, and they have a route that they go on so they can make sure, that they are able to meet the needs of all the shelters every day. So this is a specialty track. It's not a regular sheltering assignment.
What level is the SSG made available?
Level 5 and above.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, in addition to our sheltering support group, we have our headquarters sheltering manager and our district coordinator. And I'm going to explain just the differences in between the two. Our headquarters sheltering manager, they are there at headquarters supporting the shelter managers and the sheltering operation for the various shelters that we have open during the DRO. They are there to assist you. So whatever information that you need in assistance, they're there to assist as well. These are the managers, the sheltering managers that receive your daily reports. They get those numbers and what's going on in the shelters so that they can also plan ahead and make projections to make sure that you have what you need in order to have a high, that you can work well and be successful at your shelter. They also help leadership to prioritize the sheltering needs and understand the shelter challenges and their status. So they are a good resource if you have questions as well. Of course, you would have to go through your chain of command. If you have a shelter manager on site, that's where you would go. And then the shelter manager will go up to the headquarters sheltering manager who reports to the mass care chief. So you have different levels of support in order to make you successful at your shelter. Okay. Now, the district coordinator, this role opens up when there's a need, a large operation where there's a need to divide the area that's affected into different districts. So the district operation, they open up in order to help implement and make sure that sheltering gets what they need. So they would be your first line if you needed assistance in a district. So they continue to be responsible for the operational sheltering planning. So they also will plan those activities based on the information that our shelters provide to them. And they also work with our headquarters sheltering manager. They monitor and provide situational awareness and information to support our DRO headquarters in decision-making. They maintain an oversight of the consistency and quality of sheltering across the districts. So if it's necessary and the operation is large enough, it will break down from just the singular sheltering in a specific area to where it has to move out to other outlying areas to support those shelters that are opened in a particular area. North Carolina on a deployment, they had to spread out and open up. This was during Florence, to open up other districts because the disaster moved out into the outlying areas. So these district coordinators also help to support you guys as well. It's just broken down into a smaller portion in order to accommodate all of the shelters and meet the needs of our clients and our staff in a particular DRO. Okay. Do we have any questions regarding that? Okay. So I think
I have a question for the group. This is Sherry. What do you suppose are the two things that are going to make your headquarters sheltering manager / district coordinator the most happy?
Reports on time.
Reports on time, says Ken Rieger. Ding, 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 ding. There's one.
And for somebody to do your paperwork.
Anybody else out there got the second one? Yep, Monica, exactly right. Reports on time. That's the first one. The second one is a little more nebulous, but it is communicate, communicate, communicate. Do not let your sheltering manager at headquarters find out from the shelter support team that you didn't have what you needed. Yes, Monica, exactly. Keep them informed. Okay, it should not ever come as a surprise to your sheltering lead that you ran out of forms or that you needed something that they could have helped you with. Okay, and that's my soapbox for the moment. All right, who's up next? Jane Scanlon.
I know, look at how far we've come. I am so excited that you guys have stuck with us today, because now it is time to close the shelter. So as you all know, we post the 24-hour notice before closing, or as we all know, if there's an evacuation order that is lifted, most clients just go home immediately. If there are no clients in the shelter, we close the shelter. Find your opening inspection and your pictures. Find the inventory forms to find out where everything needs to go back to. Collect all of the paper. So now you have to find the registrations, the referrals, the reports and logs, and ask the shelter lead where to direct the paperwork from the shelter. Things come in from all over the nation during a DR. All over. You can't believe how far they come. And we want to make sure that the paperwork doesn't sit in a shelter manager box for 5 years until some other chapter opens it and they're like, oh, well, there's those forms we were looking for. So we talk about cots. I want you to clean. I want you to inspect the cots and then put them back in the trailer after they're clean. Take the time to clean, find the cot cleaning procedure on the exchange. I know that it's there. Right. And then if you have extra cots, because you could be asking for cots on your 6409s through the whole time, and they're not going to fit back in the trailer. So we talk a lot about situational awareness. So you have to make sure if you're just putting in a 6409 to close the shelter, that logistics has an opportunity to bring the right equipment to close down the shelter. And we don't want logistics to get mad at us. We want logistics to work with us. Again, as I say, the cot cleaning process is found on the exchange. With COVID, I'm sure, we're gonna try to maintain as sanitary of environment as we can. Just don't use bleach or any bleach solution on those cots. There is everything that came out of that trailer is now going to go back in that trailer. So there are even trailers from other regions and other chapters. So make sure everything that is on your site, that your shelter lead knows what is left. We don't walk away and leave it for logistics to clean up. We have to be part of the process. So make sure the facility knows that we are closing. Post signs outside with the 1-800 Red Cross number for anyone needing assistance to call. Contact the shelter lead to find out if your work location is changing or if you're done, and keep great records because that really helps with the closing of the shelter. You're going to put in a 6409 for the closing of the shelter, to request the trailer to be returned. So make sure that, you can even work with the facility to find out, if you have 800 cases of water left on site, maybe the facility would take care of those cases of water for us. Oh, and David O'Neill is telling us if there are cots that are broke, and there are broken cots, put in a salvage report or just forward that information to logistics. Create an area, say these are not going back because they're broke. Because if you don't note that, I promise you those cots are going to be put back in the trailer, and then they're going to show up at the next event, and they're going to be broken cots. So just awareness of what it is that, we're constantly trying to make it easy on the next person. We're trying to make sure that we bring the facility back to the level of cleanliness of how it was set up when we took over the facility. So there. Sherry Curtis has a question.
Well, actually, it's a comment.
Okay.
So Jane alluded to this. Just because your shelter is closing, do not release your SAs, right? There's still work to be done. And it's possible that just because your shelter is closing, there might be another shelter that is still going to be open for a period of time. So if you have SAs who've only been there for 2 or 3 days, you're going to want to notify staffing when you are completely done with them. And staffing may reassign them. They may reassign them to another shelter. They may reassign them to DES. They may reassign them to feeding. You just don't know. So be very, very careful about releasing your SAs when you're done with your shelter. The end. What else we got? Oh.
And can I just take a moment to thank Sherry Curtis and Brenda Bridges and Alicia and Bitsy and everyone who has helped put this on today. This is a huge event to be able to have all of you guys virtual, and you stayed with us. I'm sorry, I know I'm gonna cry.
She's modeling. We have a captive audience here.
I know they're going to see. So, I mean, it's just been great. So do we have any follow-up questions that are burning that you guys are dying to ask? And we may not have the answers, but we could always find out.